Well, hey there, entrepreneurs. Welcome to 30 days of the Canon M50. If you haven't already downloaded the free PDF guide on the first video, that's just about a minute long, make sure you go back to the beginning of the series, get that free PDF on the best settings for video for the Canon M50. But otherwise, let's jump into today's video. So it does not take long of being on YouTube and watching YouTube videos, and you see all the different, quality videos that are out there, some of the bad ones that are out there. And then you start to kind of pick up on certain stuff, like I like that style or I like this style. And then you notice, oh my gosh, that nice blurry background. How do I get that? Well, in this video, let's talk about it. So already in the M50 series, we've talked about the difference between the kit lens and then the prime lens. And one of the things that I mentioned in that video, and I'll link that up above in the YouTube card as well, is that a prime lens has what's called a lower aperture, or you'll hear it commonly referred to as the f-stop, or you'll see it like f 3.0 or 2.0 or 1.7, whatever. That's the aperture, and what that does is decide how much of the lens is open and how much of it is closed down. So basically, is the eye of the lens really closed down and it's not getting a whole lot of light, and so that number is bigger at that point for whatever reason. And then if it's more open to let in more light, is that number smaller, like an f2.0, and then it lets in much more light, and it makes the background blurry as well. So it was about a year before I got my first prime lens, and that was after I had the Canon M50 I, and I eventually bought the Canon M3. So once I got that and I got the M6 and stuff, then I started looking into what kind of prime lens that I want. Now you hear a bunch of people on YouTube talk about a 50mm lens and it's great for this, and the nifty 50 and whatever else when it comes to Canon's camera. And yes, that's a great lens, but it didn't work out that great for me, simply because I have a very small office. Yes, this is like the YouTube studio video recording portion of the office, but straight on the other half, a few steps away, is my actual workstation, and I have another desk over there. So this is my legit office. This is where I talk to clients, and I'm doing my one-on-one coaching calls and video conferences and interviews, and I'm recording my podcast episodes and all kinds of stuff. So this is my workstation. So I don't have a whole bunch of space to sit the camera way across the room for the focal length to be great. So the thing that I needed was a lens that wasn't so close up on my face like a 50mm would be, and I needed it to be a little bit wider. It wasn't until I got my Panasonic J85 that I started experimenting and started understanding more and much more better what kind of focal lengths would work better for me. Not to get too technical, but something to understand is that when it comes to focal lengths, each prime lens has a certain number on it, 35mm, 20mm, or whatever. And the smaller that number is, the wider it is. When it comes to what's called crop sensor cameras, like the Canon M50 is, it's an APS-C sensor size. And I know this is going to get a little technical, but stay with me. It's not going to get too bad. It's basically, let's say, a medium size sensor. It's a decent size. Micro Four Thirds, it's even smaller. Full frame, bigger. Medium format, way bigger. So that's how that works. Because nobody really explained it to me either. When I was getting into cameras, I'm like, well, what's the difference? Does it make one better or worse? So the M50 has a great sensor in it. The only thing is that it has what's called a crop, aka crop sensor camera. What that means is that for every lens length that you see that's going to go on this camera, you need to multiply that times 1.6, because that is the crop factor that the lens has. So if I have, for example, Micro Four Thirds, that one has a crop sensor factor of 2.0. So my 20mm lens is actually a 40mm lens when it comes to, the full frame camera. And that's what they're judging all of those sizes, what it actually is or actually be equivalent to. That's how they're deciding what it actually would be, so that they can better judge, is this really going to be wide? How much closer in is it going to be on my face? And all of that great stuff. So the 50mm lens on the Canon M50 is actually going to be equivalent to about an 80mm lens. So it's going to be really, really close. The, smaller that focal length is, like a 15mm, that's going to be much wider and you get way more shots. Like right now, I'm probably at about, maybe 18 or 20 or so or something like that. And I'm maybe have the tripod about 1.5 steps away. So it's fairly close, but I'm able to adjust it because I'm using the kit lens. So there are some things like that, stuff to think about. How much space do you have to actually record? Because if you got 80mm and you're in a small room like this, you're gonna have that thing down the hallway trying to just get a decent frame shot like this instead of something else. So a 50mm doesn't work out for everybody. So I started using stuff like a 20mm lens, a 35mm lens, and that's what I actually invested in. I took back the 20mm lens that I had before. It's starting to have some funky motor issues or whatever, so it's like, now I don't know nothing about all that. So I wanted a different focal length too. So the adapter comes off, and that's just the adapter, and then this is the lens portion, and then you connect them back together, and that's it. So this will make sure that it can fit the M50. So I'll swap this lens and put it on the tripod first so that at the same distance, you'll see just how much closer a 35mm lens can get, and then I'll try to reframe the shot using this lens. So let me try that. Okay, so without moving anything, the camera and the tripod is still sitting in the same place. I've just taken off the kit lens that was at 18mm, and I put on the 35mm lens. So this is how much closer, this is what I was talking about, that crop factor comes into play. But I've dropped the aperture down to f2.0, which is as low as this lens can get. So it's wide open, letting in much more light. And the background, as you can see, even that flower, I'm sitting in the same spot. That flower is now much, much blurrier, and you can't even see the books, but you can see the outer portion and the edge of the picture frame, and even that's super blurry. So let me rearrange the shot to get at least the rest of my head in focus and in the shot, and then we'll adjust some stuff. Okay, so I readjusted the framing of the shot, and I've pushed it back. My hat is still cut off a little bit. I could raise the tripod up some more. But if I wanted to have like the exact framing, I'd have to push the tripod back even further. But this is okay for the example that we're doing here. So right now the actual aperture is at f2.0. So that's as low as it could get. And the ISO, I have that at 400. So I would need to, brighten that up, and I can do that using the app. I can make it brighter, I can make it darker. And about right there is typically okay. It's fairly bright and it's good enough for my purposes. So, as you can see, even the flower behind me is a little bit darker. And if I came closer, let's make sure that focus stays on me. So now I'm closer to the lens. I'm about, 1.5 feet or so away, just leaning up some awkwardly. But I'm closer to the lens, and as you can see, that flower is much, much blurrier. Now, that's the benefit of having a prime lens, so that you can see that behind me is blurry, even though it's not that far away. But because a kit lens doesn't have that ability to go that far down as far as the aperture, then I need to get a prime lens so that I can do that if I wanted to do that. Okay, so this is what I was talking about as far as that aperture making the difference. Now, everything being constant, tripod still in the same spot, I'm still at ISO 400. With the kit lens, as far, and I'm at 35mm on the kit lens, as far away as the camera is still, the shot is much darker. So that's what I mean, that it can't let in that much light. As low as the aperture can get on the kit lens, set at this focal length, is f5.6, so it makes it super dark, which means I now need to adjust my ISO so that I can bring that to a brighter setting. So that, let's bring it up now. I am at 800. Let's go up to, that's 1,000. That's 1250, 1600, 2000 is too much for me. So let's do 1600. So that's ISO 1600 right there, just to get an equivalent amount of light that I was getting before. So even though now the flower is not as blurry as it could be, it's still not bad. So yes, it's easy to say that you can get a blurry background with the kit lens. But if I came close again, like I am now and like I did before, now it's a little bit blurrier, but getting more distance between myself and the flower does help, but it's not going to be as blurry. So having a blurry background is super nice. It's easier to do when you're in a much bigger space and you have more space between yourself and the background, and then you can make that F number as low as possible and then adjust your ISO accordingly. And that's why I was saying, like, the exposure triangle and all that stuff comes into play, and I probably should throw that in and then do a video about that. But there's a lot of videos out there already that talk about it and that explain it really, really well. But basically, when it all comes down to it, the aperture and the f-stop, that really, really is what goes into getting a blurry background on the Canon M50. This video is too long. That's all there is for today.